Thank you so much for being here and for your leadership. Why don't we have the rest of the panel introduce themselves? Maybe we'll start with the Insurance Commissioner, and then we'll go around and introduce and get into the discussion. It's all yours.
Senate President Pro Tem Steinberg, Minority Leader Dutton, Senators, and Assemblymember Bell.
And let me welcome Jim Bell as well, Assemblymember Bell. Glad you could join us.
It's a real privilege to get to join you today, and Senator Steinberg, thank you for your ongoing leadership on this critical issue, which goes back to your time on the Sacramento City Council and even before then. You have been someone who's been a champion, authored incredibly important legislation, but also been at the forefront of the founding of the Mind Institute here in Sacramento, one of the nation's foremost centers for learning and clinical work on this subject. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you. My comments today will be limited to those matters within the jurisdiction of the California Department of Insurance. As the senators know well, we have a bifurcated regulatory scheme here in California. I oversee health insurance. Our sister agency at the Department of Managed Healthcare, from whom you'll hear later in this panel, oversees HMOs. My remarks will also focus on the preventative measures the Department of Insurance has taken to systematically address the barriers faced by families attempting to obtain behavioral therapy and ABA and increase their access to these transformative therapies. The Department has embarked on a course of action to identify those barriers and create a strategic plan for surmounting them. The Department's purpose and goal is to ensure that insurance companies are in full compliance with California's mental health parity law and other laws in the insurance code. I think it's important to note at this point that it's the California Department of Insurance's view that ABA coverage is required under the Mental Health Parity Act as it relates to the insurance code. To this end, that is to the end of removing barriers and seeking to systematically address the challenges faced by those with autism and their families, we've taken three major steps to date to address the issue of coverage for ABA therapy. First, notice to insurers. Our first step was to inform insurers of the status of our independent medical review decisions and remind them of their legal obligations pursuant to those decisions. On May 17th, the California Department of Insurance sent a notice to all admitted insurers in the state of California, reminding them that the California Department of Insurance is committed to enforcing the provisions of the insurance code governing independent medical review of disputed health care services to ensure the full protection under law of policyholders under our regulatory authority. The notice also pointed out that the insurance commissioner's written decisions adopting the determinations made by independent medical review are binding on the insurer. The notice specifically asked insurers to take note of 9 separate instances in 2010 in which insurers' denials of ABA were overturned in the California Department of Insurance's independent medical review, and specified in addition that in 2 of those instances the insurer's denials, based on a contention that the therapy was experimental or investigational, were overturned because such treatment is now recognized as the standard of care for autism. The Department's notice further stated that in another 7 instances, the independent medical reviewers overturned the insurer's denial, finding the treatment was medically necessary for the insured. So our first step was putting insurers on notice with regard to these binding decisions of independent medical review. Second step deals with network adequacy. The Department of Insurance initiated a comprehensive review and assessment of the adequacy of insurers' provider networks for ABA therapy. The Department's regulations establish provider network access requirements for mental health care services required by the Mental Health Parity Act in the definition of basic health services. Those regulations require insurers, in arranging for provider network service, to ensure that, and I quote, there are mental health professionals with skills appropriate to care for the mental health needs of covered persons and with sufficient capacity to accept covered persons within 30 minutes or 15 miles of a covered person's residence or workplace, end quote. The Department sent a request for geographical access report and provider network listing of behavioral intervention therapies to all 106 health insurers with covered lives in California. We refer to this as a data call, and this data call was issued under the Department's provider network access standards for health insurance policies and agreements. The purpose of this data call is to enable the Department to evaluate adequacy and accessibility of ABA therapy for the autistic insured population covered by each health insurer in California. Under this data call, insurers must submit reports to the department showing the geographic distribution of behavioral intervention therapists in each insurer's network in relation to its members, identifying all in-network providers, and the number of individuals within an organizational provider who are available under the provider network contract. The department is requiring insurers to submit separate reports for individual, small group, and large group policies organized by county or geographic service areas. The only network providers to be included in the reports are behavioral intervention therapists who may be mental health professionals who are trained to provide behavioral intervention therapy. The insurer must also document that anyone listed is capable of providing medically necessary behavioral intervention therapy and has sufficient practice capacity to do so. We are beginning to get responses from insurers to this request. We've not received all the responses. We are going through them. Those insurance companies that have responded are asserting arguments that you heard earlier made by the California Association of Health Plans on behalf of HMOs. And those arguments fall into basically three categories. First, the insurers are arguing that ABA therapy is not provided for at all in the applicable insurance contract, so the Mental Health Parity Act does not require that it be covered for a severe mental illness. Insurers are analogizing to outpatient prescription drugs, claiming that a policy does not cover any outpatient prescription drugs and thus is not obligated to cover those drugs when medically necessary to treat a mental illness. The second category of responses we've received so far is ABA is not listed as a covered service under the insurer's policies because there's no comparable service that is required for medical conditions. And the third general category of responses that we're receiving is that ABA is almost always provided by individuals who are not licensed or certified by the state of California's healthcare providers. And since it is a crime for someone to engage in the delivery of services to diagnose or treat a medical condition unless they're licensed to do so, ABA cannot be considered a healthcare or medical service. Suffice it to say that it is the California Department of Insurance's view that we disagree with these responses made by the insurers to date. And as I set forth earlier, we believe that, in fact, ABA is a required covered service under the Mental Health Parity Act, and that it's not necessary under our codes, this is the insurance code now, that individuals be licensed in order to be a part of a provider network to meet network adequacy standards under the insurance code for the provision of this service. The third category of actions by the department is enforcement actions. The department has filed and served an administrative enforcement action against a health insurer who, until very recently, declined to follow two IMR decisions overturning that health insurer's denial of ABA treatment for a policyholder. In these two particular cases, notwithstanding the IMR decision, which is a binding decision on insurers, this insurance company continued until recently to decline to provide coverage. Having said that, I want to note that we believe that this is a practice prevalent across the industry, and we are looking at the other insurers as well, both in terms of their responses to our data call and their responses to IMR decisions. The department is concerned that there's a significant barrier to access posed to consumers who are forced repeatedly to go through the IMR process when the broad weight of the IMR decisions indicates that ABA is medically necessary, not experimental, and covered under the Mental Health Parity Act. With me today is my special counsel and Deputy Commissioner for Policy Planning, Pat Sturdivant, who I have tasked with responsibility for coordinating the department's response as it relates to autistic disorders, as well as Tony Signorelli, who's my Deputy Commissioner for the Consumer Services Branch, which is the front line element of the department receiving complaints and which oversees the IMR process. And we received specific written questions from the committee that they are prepared to answer in more detail if the chair is so interested on this panel as well as the next panel.
Right.